Welcome to episode 13 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast. Tonight we're talking with Robbie Denning, and we're talking about mule deer. But not just any mule deer. We are talking about big mule deer. Robbie's been hunting mule deer since the late 70s, only missing one season in 35 years of mule deer hunting. At 25, he gave up his pursuit of all other big game to focus specifically on hunting mule deer and getting the biggest and best bucks possible. Maybe you know him from Rockslide. Rockslide is an awesome online website for Western hunting that includes articles and a forum and something really cool that Robbie does, which is share online his live hunts. Additionally, Robbie's an author. Just this past summer, he came out with a book called Hunting Big Mule Deer: How to Take the Best Buck of Your Life. So in tonight's show, we get into some of that. When you listen to this episode, if you have any questions for Robbie, be sure to email to us, podcast@exomountaingear. Send in your questions, because we're definitely going to have Robbie back. One of the reasons we're going to have Robbie back is because the audio is a little bit glitchy tonight, so I hope you guys push through it, because it does get better, and it's definitely worth to listen. But the real reason we're having Robbie back is because he's just a wealth of information that I know you're going to love. So, check out the show notes for tonight's episode at exomountaingear.com/13. That's the numbers 13. There you'll find links to Robbie's book, links to Rockslide, and a bit more information about Robbie. With that, it's on to the show.
The Hunt Backcountry podcast is proudly brought to you by Exo Mountain Gear, makers of ultralight, ultra-tough packs that are designed to do what you love most, hunt the backcountry. Exo packs are designed for efficiency, simplicity, and durability that's backed by a lifetime warranty. To learn more about Exo Mountain Gear, please visit www.exomountaingear.com.
Well, Robbie, welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast, man. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for helping me with all the technical stuff.
Yeah, we are getting there. So, for those of you listening who aren't familiar with Robbie, he is a major player in rockslide.com, which is a forum and a destination online for backcountry bow hunting that you've probably heard of. But Robbie, kind of give us your background. I mean, definitely a mule deer guy, and kind of how did you not only start hunting, but get to where you're at now, involved in the industry in the way that you are?
All right. Well, I'm born and raised here in southeast Idaho, just outside Idaho Falls, a little town called Iona. And I grew up in a mule deer hunting family. I grew up at a time when mule deer hunting was phenomenal around here. It was still pretty much at its peak when I was a kid, and stayed really good through the 80s. And I define good as access to tags, lots of country to hunt, good dates to hunt. We had it all back then. And I just got the bug as a young man. My dad was a big buck hunter and really encouraged me. And I also fell in love with outdoor riding. And my second year in college, I changed from electrical engineering to English. Everybody rolled their eyes at me, but I really enjoyed riding and writing about the outdoors and hunting. And I grew up reading Dwight Shue and Chuck Adams and all those guys. And so that was the direction I wanted to go. In my 20s, I spent just a lot of time kind of learning the backcountry around here, and then expanded into other western states, and did pretty good. Tags were a little bit easier then than they are now, but I kept learning, and I started taking some pretty good mule deer. And I don't want to sound like I'm the only one. I know a lot of guys that have dedicated themselves to it, like I have, and done very well at it. But that was my focus. I'm 46 now, so I've been hunting mule deer in some form or other for the last 38 years, and I've learned a ton. In 2006, David Long contacted me when he was writing his first book and wanted me to do a chapter or two. I had taken a couple of good bucks in Wyoming with archery equipment. I included a few chapters there. It was really nice of them to include me. And a few years later, I think it was 2011, I was working on an article. It's on Rockslide now. It's called Breaking 200. And I was just putting together an article on what it takes to kill 200-inch bucks for the average DIY guy. And I contacted David again. and just see if he wanted to contribute. He's made that benchmark before, and he said, "Hey, I got a better idea. Give me about a week, and I'll call you back." And I thought, "Man, what's that about?" And about a week later, he called back. He said, "Hey, man, I've been working with a guy by the name of Aaron Slater, who I'd never heard of, and said, we're putting together a website." He says, I want you to help me with stuff. And so he cut me into Rock Slide. That's when Rock Slide was born. It was really launched as a kind of an online magazine. The forums really grew, and thanks to Aaron and David. They were very well known. And fast forward 4 years, Aaron and David moved on. It's myself and Ryan Avery now that are running Rock Slide, and I'm quasi-editor, half owner, and Ryan is the quasi-IT guy, half owner. He's the one that takes the phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning and the site crashes and all that. And I'm the one that with our writers, and Steve Speck's with us today. He's one of our sponsors. We appreciate you, Steve. And so with our sponsors, just highlight their products that can help anybody hunt the backcountry of the West.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely dive into talking about Rock Slide a little bit more. Something you said in the beginning there, and this is, I'm sure, a big topic, but would just kind of love to hear some of your thoughts is, you grew up in Idaho in the heyday of mule deer, and that's something we've touched on before in previous episodes. I think when we were talking about Lenny and mule deer hunting in Idaho and how things have changed. But in your mind, what has changed between that heyday of mule deer hunting in Idaho and where things are at now, and what are some of the causes of the changes?
Well, good question. Where do we start with that?
I was gonna say it's probably a huge topic.
I'm kind of in the camp that mule deer doing pretty good, all things considered. What I mean by that is if we go back into the 80s when I was just really first starting to deer hunt, and I can look out my front window right now, there's a little mountain just south of town here that you literally, if you knew what you were doing, now I wasn't one of those guys, but I had friends that were, you could get a 26 to a 30-inch deer in just, a day or two of them. God forbid it might take you a week of going after school, but you could get lined up on a deer like that. And what's different is people focused on it. Back then, mule deer is kind of an afterthought. It's not a lot different than it is now. People are really enamored by elk. I mean, the same guy that will take 3 weeks of vacation, hike naked into the backcountry and sleep under a tree for 2 weeks and hunt elk with a sharp stick won't spend a tenth of that effort on mule. Just how it is. And back then, nobody hiked in for mule deer. Didn't hardly see anybody in the backcountry. Even though we've got a lot of ATVs now, back then there was a lot of Jeeps and a lot of Jeep trails. And so, there's still ways to get back to where the deer were. But really, I think what's changed is everybody's focused on it now, and they're willing to put that effort in and that time in. And so that kind of shrunk the backcountry. And in my mind, backcountry is not just wilderness or 10 miles in. Backcountry to me is anywhere that you leave the masses behind. I mean, it could be just a 1.5 mile hike across the massive Oregon Canyon, where not very many people go. And it can be 15 miles in the backcountry too, and anywhere in between. But basically, you can't drive to it. Usually, if you're going to hunt it right, you gotta take your gear with you, at least for a night. Those places have shrunk. There's not very many of them anymore. And this little mountain that I mentioned south of town here, that was kind of the difference back then is, you had your road hunters. There was enough big bucks. A few of those guys were tipping them over, but anybody that put any effort getting away from the road was almost alone. And we had liberal seasons. This is kind of getting into the second part. But besides more of a focus on mule deer now, we had seasons in southeast Idaho. The season runs until the second Sunday in November. That's when it ended. So that means the earliest it closed was the 8th of November, and the latest it closed was the 13th. So I'm doing my math right, plus or minus a day. And so my dad was born November 2nd. And we didn't even think about deer for his birthday. That was just kind of how we did it. Yeah, we'd go out on opening day just to say we did, stuff like that. But it was his birthday. From then on is when we were looking for bucks. And now, fast forward 30 years and talking to some of the old timers around here, they were thinking the same. The trophy hunters, the guys that look for the big bucks, that's when they hunted. And so we had that ability. And so right now, people think, oh, the big bucks just aren't there like they were. Okay, I'll grant them that. However, you look at some of our late buck hunts in Idaho and third season Colorado, fourth season Colorado, 128 in Wyoming, anywhere that allows buck hunting during the rut and has somewhat managed their numbers either through, really conservative seasons like Idaho does now. I mean, we only hunt deer for 2 weeks in most of Idaho. That's pretty conservative. The 10th through the 24th. Steve, you might have some units over there that are open a little bit later.
Yeah, 31st.
But for the most part around here, it's about the 10th to the 24th. And so the guys that draw the late buck hunts that can hunt after that, well, some of those tags are like 2 to 5% draw. So why? Because there's still big bucks out there in those units. And the difference is a lot of people are going out in October with the hardest time to hunt mule deer, especially in brushy, lower elevation country like a lot of southeast Idaho is. That's just a hard time to hunt mule deer. They're not in the rut. Their winter coats have come on, and so they're very sensitive to heat. And so, typical October, I mean, this year was record temperatures. They're just not very active. And, combine that with a fair amount of hunting pressure out there, and those big bucks are just hard to find. However, you can go out now. Today's November 1st, and you can go anywhere now, and especially in the morning, you'll see these bigger bucks hanging around these does now. And so that's what's changed, is we don't have the opportunity to hunt the deer when they're most visible. And I understand why. I mean, you couldn't really have rut hunting now like you did in the 80s because of the increased focus on the deer. I mean, you really probably could shoot too many unless you went to something like what Colorado does. They allow rut hunting, but everything's on a draw. Even their units that have a liberal number of licenses, they at least have some control over them. Where Idaho is still in, OTC state, you can still get a license. 80% of the state you can get a license. So you do have to be careful when you're hunting them. So that's where really what's changed is when we're hunting them, and the increased focus on the deer makes it harder to hunt them even when you do have a good area. But I'm not of the sky is falling school that, oh my gosh, the deer are. If I believed what some guys believe, and I wrote this in my book, I'd feel guilty hunting mule deer. I mean, I read on some of these forums, I'm like, oh my gosh, why do you guys even buy a license if it's that bad and there's so few big bucks? Why are we even hunting them? And luckily, that's not the majority of people; it's the minority of people. Yeah. But I really think that now you have to be hyper focused to kill them. You can't just be casual and just pick the right dates and go do it, or you got to be really lucky at the draw tags.
Right.
Now, I know there's somebody out there that's going to say, "Hey, I can show that our doe fawn ratios are lower than they were 30 years ago, and there's issues with browse and access." I get all that. I would never argue against that. I'm talking as the West, kind of as an average. Taken as a whole, I wouldn't be hunting mule deer if I didn't think it was still worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Are deer numbers in eastern Idaho just been fairly steady? I mean, obviously you have ups and downs, but since 1980 to now?
Deer numbers, 1980 to now, without having anything in front of me to pull from, you could make arguments in small geographical areas that they're up, and other places they're down. Mm-hmm. But as an average, I'd say they're pretty stable. And as of right now, November 1, 2015, they're actually pretty high because we've had probably going on 4 very mild winters in a row. And that's the other thing I learned over the last 30 years, that winters and weather manage the deer in the Intermountain West.
Yeah.
not necessarily hunting pressure. And hunting pressure has an effect, don't get me wrong, especially on buck numbers. But your question on deer numbers, they're stable. I mean, you can find a lot of units that have, a good number of deer in them. And you also said something about the ups and downs. A lot of guys, we had a real big deer peak in the 87, 88, 89, 90. Totally weather dependent. You go back and look at the drought years of 87, 88, all through those years. That's when Yellowstone burned. I mean, everything was really dry. Mule deer just do really well. And yeah, we had record numbers of deer then. You look in the books, you can see they killed a lot of big bucks around here in that time. But again, that was a function of weather more than anything. So if you just kind of take off the peaks and take off the valleys, I think deer numbers are pretty stable. And you can make, arguments. Steve, you live in Boise. I mean, I know some of those foothills, there's a lot of housing additions in there now and everything that weren't there before. So, I understand that their habitat is shrinking, but nowhere has deer habitat been affected like Colorado. And as soon as they started managing their deer through limited quota licenses in 1999, their deer hunting became phenomenal in a lot of units that were formerly just poor, could hardly find a 3.0. And that just gets down to hunting licenses is really what that is.
Interesting.
So pressure, in terms of hunting pressure, still remains a major factor for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's one reason the late buck hunts in Idaho and the ones in Colorado that are limited, Colorado's third season is open right now. I believe it opened yesterday, and it runs through next Sunday, and then fourth season opens just a few days after that. So they're hunting bucks clear into mid-November. And as long as they're managing those licenses, those are high quality hunts. I mean, look at the points it takes to draw them. 3 to 15 points. That's a 3 to a 15-year wait, where if we just hit rewind and go back to 1975, you could hunt all those units that late every single year. So I think it's a function of hunting pressure. Yes, there's, like I said, there are some habitat issues. I'm not arguing that, but I'm just saying that the hunter focus now is through the roof compared to what it used to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, cool. So let's dive into a topic that you mentioned, that you have a book. And so, your 30 plus years of mule deer experience in several states led you to come out with this book when? It was just in the past year, right?
Yeah, we released it in July.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the premise of the book, and then kind of the high level, instruction and points that you kind of make to the readers.
Well, the opening part of the book, I wanted people to know a little bit about me, my history, why I might even be qualified to write a book like this. Some of the stuff we've already shared. I dedicate a small portion of the book to that. And then I dedicate another portion of the book to just the recent history of mule deer. Most people agree the 50s and 60s were the peak in big buck numbers. We're probably never going to see that again. However, that may have been produced by major manipulation through predator management and sheep grazing and stuff like that. We may not want to see that again, as good as it sounds. I mean, there were some things going on that we just can't replicate. You can't go in and poison every predator on the western half of the U.S. just so you can have mule deer. It's just not going to happen. And back then, they were able to do that until Nixon banned. What was it? 1080? I can't remember what that poison was that was called. But anyways, I give kind of history on that. And I think guys need to understand that a little bit, or otherwise they get in, you get into the mindset of, man, things are so bad now for mule deer. And that attitude, your thoughts of how you view mule deer are going to dictate how you hunt. I believe that. I believe you're going to see what you think you're going to see. And if you think it sucks, it's going to suck. So I spend a portion of the book kind of, covering that. And I actually quote myself as saying, I'm glad I didn't grow up in the heyday of mule deer, because I would have been spoiled rotten. Yeah. And the thought of going out now and backpacking in 4 miles or horse packing in 10 miles, oh man, that's for the birds. I'll just stay home and watch Netflix. And guys that have succumbed to that. I mean, I remember going to fish and game meetings in the 90s, and guys were just mad that they had hunted 3 days and not got a 30-incher. And in all fairness, that was all it took before. And so I talk about that in the book. And then the next section of the book is what I'm leading up to is the mindset of big buck hunting. I don't really like the word trophy because I think it's too narrow. And that's why the title of the book, Hunting Big Mule Deer, How to Take the Best Buck of Your Life. I think the word big kind of encompasses more than just a trophy, than just a score, because there's a lot of big mule deer out there that may not score well. Mm-hmm. And I go into my definition of that, and then the mindset of the trophy mule deer hunter. It's different than anybody that I don't live in the East. I would imagine if I did, and I met a whitetail hunter that focused exclusively on big whitetails, they would have some of these same mindset. But I really get into that. And not so much as a kind of a preachy as this is what you need to do, but more of this is what I've observed.
Yeah. And
Brian LaTurner, he owns monstermuleys.com. He's a friend of mine, and he contributed in the book. I noticed I've never met him personally. I mean, we're friends through PMs and emails and stuff like that. But I can just spend about 5 minutes talking to him, and I can tell he's got that mindset. And it's a mindset of positive. You got to be positive, and I'm not talking about rah. I can do anything with my mind positive. I'm just saying you can't be a naysayer about mule deer, or it's going to get you. The third day on the mountain when your feet are cold and you're tired and you want to go home to mama, you will, because it's not worth being here. But and then the mindset is also one of just intense focus. I don't hunt anything else, not because I don't want to. I'm an outfitter too. I guide a few weeks each year. I guide for elk hunters. I just don't have time if I want to do well on mule deer. And fishing, one of my favorite in the world. I just pretty much had to give it up, except for what I do with my kids. And I'm fishing at little ponds that have been stocked by the Fish and Game, where in my mind, no, I want to be down on the South Fork fishing with minnows for 11-pound rainbows. That's just the mindset, but I had to give that up too. And so I dedicate a portion of the book to that. And then kind of one other thing too is a lot of the big buck hunters I know end up hunting solo. And I dedicate a portion of the book to hunting solo. Now, I'll just say it right here. Hunting solo is not safe. And I don't recommend, if you're afraid of it, don't do it. However, if you want to kill big mule deer, you end up doing it alone for a couple of reasons. One of them is the tag situation now. You just can't draw enough good tags by cutting your odds 50% by applying with a buddy. And in most states, effectively, that's what happens. I mean, I realize there's, different ways to draw licenses, but, Idaho especially, if I put in with a friend and say we're putting in for a hunt that has 30 tag, I'm lowering my odds of being able to pull that tag, maybe not by 50%, but, if there's only 2 tags left or 1 tag left and they pull your license and there's 2 people on it, you just dropped your odds 50% and you just got thrown out of the hat. And so the tag situation, and also just finding someone that has that same mindset. I meet lots of guys that want to go deer hunting. I meet lots of guys that are, they're ready to do it. I'll climb the highest peak. I'll sleep naked under a tree, whatever it takes. But I find that's a lot easier said than done. Mm-hmm. And if you are not equally matched with somebody when you get out in the woods, it's hard on both of you. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times you just end up hunting alone. I don't do it on purpose. And I talk about it in the book with some guys that I've hunted with. And those are some of my best hunts ever. If you can find a buddy that wants to do it like you do, that's awesome. But I think most guys out there that have killed more than 3 or 4 really big bucks are nodding their heads right now going, yeah, you pretty much end up by yourself. A lot of people just don't want to put the time towards it that it takes. I mean, who wants to take 10 days off of work if you get 20 days vacation and on a hunt that's you're probably not going to get a big buck. That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, there's a lot more fun things to do than that. You can go salmon fishing or archery elk hunting or something and have a lot better odds than that. So I spend part of that mindset of the book on just talking about, getting the right mindset and learning from people that have gone ahead of us, and just studying other hunters. And like I said at the beginning of this, I'm not here to say I got all the answers. I know plenty of guys that have killed big bucks, that just because they focus on it. Then I move into how to find good places to hunt mule deer, big mule deer. I get asked a lot more where to hunt mule deer than I do how. And that was one reason I really wanted to do this podcast with you guys, because I thought, man, the how is where it's at. And David Long and I talked about this one time, I remember. I asked him straight up, is it the how or is it the where? And he said, it's definitely the how. And I said, I'm glad you say that, because that's what I think too. Now, the where is super duper important. You can have all the how, and if you're not hunting in the right place, you don't matter how good of a hunter you are, you can't kill what's not there.
Right.
So I spend a considerable portion of the book, probably 20% of it, talking about how I find and how I pick places to hunt. I don't go into a top 10 must apply these units, mostly because I hate that stuff. And not really doing anybody a service if I tell them where to apply or where to buy their licenses. And I use the analogy in the book of that's just like the old saying of you teach a man to fish and he can eat for a lifetime, but if you give him a fish, he can only eat for a day. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. And so I really just kind of go into the tools I use to select places that I'm going to hunt. And it's not earth shattering. It's not, anything way out of the ordinary. However, I definitely think it's worth the read. And I've already had a lot of guys get a hold of me and say, man, that's just refreshing to just be able to sit back and think, I don't have to be the smartest guy in the world. I don't have to belong every application service in the world. I don't have to hunt 5 states. I don't have to be rich. That's the biggest relief to a lot of guys. I don't have to be rich. And so that's really what we get into in how to find to hunt big mule deer.
Yeah. On that topic of finding them, I mean, there's so many angles you can come up with that. And then one thing that specifically I hear plenty of guys mention is looking at obviously previous success, of course, and then particularly looking at the books. How important do you think that is? And is that even a factor for how you process things?
Super good question. And I address that, I think, exactly in the book. The record books, I think, are less relevant today than in the past. And all I mean by that is big buck hunting is pretty tough. And the books are going to point you only to the counties that have produced record bucks in the past. And honestly, that's where I spend most of my time. I hunt very few counties that don't at least have a track record of producing bucks like that. But I think there's a whole bunch of guys out there, a whole bunch. I hear from them weekly. Yeah, I'd love a 30-incher. Yeah, I would love to have my name in the books. I just want to kill a good buck. Well, that's great, because most of the West can produce a big buck by the definition that I give in there, at least 4 years or older, 180-inch gross Boone and Crockett, big body, 250 to 350 pounds, which is a trophy in and of itself, and it's not very much appreciated in the West. But you go back east, especially the Northeast, they weigh their bucks. That's how they determine a big deer. And so by not getting so hyper-focused on Boone and Crockett producing counties, number one, you can get away from all the trophy hunters.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of guys just they're not going to pay attention to those places. And there's a lot of places in Idaho. Steve, you live not very far from many of them that grow 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old deer. Yeah, they may have 25-inch heavy antlers and a few cheaters on them. They don't make the books, but there's so many guys I talk to be thrilled to get a deer like that. And so that's the long answer to your question. Yeah, I pay attention to the record books, totally. And that's one of the top few things I consider when selecting a unit. But I think that we can spend too much time on that, and there's still a lot of places that can grow really good deer that we'd be happy with.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at the books.
Yeah. No, it's good to hear. So let's transition, if we can, to talk about the how a little bit and not so much the where. But you leading into that, you kind of mentioned something kind of first things first with that mindset. And really, if you want to kill big deer, you're going to have to give up other things, whether that's hunting other species and, just focusing other areas. So I'm sure there's some people listening who hear that and go, well, no, maybe I really don't want to kill a big deer, meaning I don't want to give up elk hunting. I don't want to give up this or that. And then there's probably the other half of guys who are going, yeah, I really do want to get that deer and I'm willing to kind of make some sacrifices. So for those guys who are kind of all in and want to go after a big deer, what's maybe some of the how that might make a difference? Maybe they've killed, other deer in the past, but they haven't made that leap to being so hyper-focused on getting after a big deer.
Okay, that guy, if I understood your question, what about the guys that are not going to give up elk hunting, they're not going to give up fishing like I have? And honestly, those are the smart guys. They're probably going to enjoy hunting more than I do, because sometimes I hunt to where it's just not enjoyable, because that's what it takes. However, I get it. A lot of guys still want to be able to have a chance at them. And I just answered a PM on Rockslide just a week ago on a guy that asked me the same thing. He was just kind of like deflated, like, wow, I guess I'm never going to kill a big buck. I wrote right back, said, no. You took what I said wrong. Basically, if you're not going to have that level of dedication, then it's going to take you longer, and you have no right to be disappointed that it's going to take you longer. That's what I'm trying to get across. Right. Because I meet too many guys who are like, I've hunted 11 years for mule deer, and I've never killed one over 24 inches on 165. Well, I'm going to be talking to them because there's no focus there. They're just, getting out a few days. Maybe they even get out a week. Today's tough hunting conditions, today it's hard to get good licenses. That's not very long. So if you're not going to hyper-focus like I have, that's all good. It's just going to take you longer.
Right.
For me, now, I'm the first to say, I am not the most efficient deer hunter. If I take a look at the number of days I've hunted, well over 1,000, versus the number of big bucks I've killed, about 25, 27, something like that. I'm looking at like 30, 40 days a buck. Mm-hmm. I know guys that are getting it done with less days than that. So I'm probably on the far side of efficiency. I'm not very efficient. I'm not the best hunter. I'm not. I'll be the first one to say it. I make up for my lack of hunting skills and focus. That's really what I'm getting at. So someone else that may be going to dedicate their life to it like I have, it's just going to take longer. Yeah. You may cut the learning curve even shorter than what I have. But what I don't want to hear from guys like that is there's no big bucks. We need to close all the seasons, because invariably that's what ends up happening. Hey man, I've hunted 2 weeks the last 3 years and I have not killed a big deer. We need more draw units. Whoa, wait a minute. That's what gets my hackle right there, because the more draw units we have, the less of us that are hunting. And I know a lot of guys that don't get to go hunting now because of various draw systems in the West, which I support a certain level of them. I'm not saying make it all over the counter. I'm not at all. To go out and hunt a year or two and then be disappointed and write letters to the fishing game that we need to, or whatever it is, a point system in Idaho, or more tags in Nevada, or less tags in Colorado, whatever it is. You don't really have the right to complain if you're not focusing like that. That's how I look at it. But some guys do fine with your traditional hunt 5 to 6 days a year. So that can pull that off. I just wanted to tell the truth in the book, so what I did.
Yeah. So to a guy who maybe has killed a few deer, but hasn't, say, broken the 180 mark and really wants to, or, even what you mentioned earlier about 200, the single biggest difference you would see and the biggest recommendation you would make to that guy would be just to devote more time to it?
No, actually. Stay off the trigger. That's what I would say to that guy. So if you're talking to the guy that killed some pretty good deer,
yeah, right,
that he wants to kill them pretty regularly,
yeah,
selling any bigger ones than that has to do with not being able to pass up the nice bucks. You are rarely ever going to see the biggest buck on your hunt, the first buck you see.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to pass up the smaller deer.
Did you hear that, Steve?
Yep. I haven't mastered that art yet, Robbie.
I understand. I want to make sure nobody thinks I'm looking down my nose at somebody that shoots 160 deer every year. I am not. That guy probably has more fun than me. I think that's great. I really do. I've talked to hundreds of buck hunters in there, and that's the thing I see is the division between the guy that's killing the big ones and the guy that just can't quite do it, is he can pass up those smaller ones. Back question, if you're not even getting to the 170 mark, it's going to take more time. That's really what it gets down to. I think you got to hunt an area 2 to 4 years to really expect to kill a 180 deer.
Mm-hmm.
And most guys, 2 to 4 years, that's a lifetime.
Yeah.
But that's really what it takes. A few people get it done sooner than that. Not very many.
Well, and
that's the problem with draw hunts, is you only get to hunt them once a lot of times.
Yeah. And what you mentioned too, it's not just hunting 2 to 4 years, it's 2 to 4 years in an area to learn that area, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
If I go to a new area, and it's just an average area, I usually won't hunt an area that doesn't have 40% of the 4 points to harvest. That's one statistic I write about in the book. There's got to be at least that many bucks in the harvest. You say, okay, this is what I can expect. But I know I got to hunt 2 to 4 years in there to really know where to be. And especially hunting in October, Mark, these bucks, after opening day, are, I believe they're in the cover before the sun is up. Most of them are in the cover before the sun is up. Now, they may be up feeding until 9 or 10 o'clock, but you can't see them unless you're right on top of them. And so if you go on a 10 hunt, same thing in the evening. I think most of these bucks are not even out until the sun is down. Okay, not sunset, I'm talking after. So you have about 50 minutes a day on a 10-day hunt. Let's say about 9 to 10 productive hunting hours that you've got in an October hunt, on pressured bucks and the average OTC unit.
Mm-hmm.
That you got to make the most of it, and you got to make sure you're out when those bucks are moving. And I'm not saying you can't kill them in the middle of the day. I've killed two of my biggest at noon. But you look at the amount of time you have to catch those bucks on their feet. Oh my gosh! Sometimes I wonder why I even go.
Right. Yeah, so that's a topic that we certainly wanted to address, was just the different times and seasons. And so, if there's a guy, again, who's looking to break, say 180s, kill other deer in the past. I mean, certainly there's guys who just love to archery hunt, and they're hunting September, late October or late August, what have you, just so they can archery hunt. But, if the deer is your goal, then maybe the weapon shouldn't be a factor. So for that fact, what would, for most guys, when would you recommend that they hunt, regardless of the weapon? Every
single weapon in every single season. And I'm glad to bring that up because that was one thing I covered in my book. A big buck hunter is a big buck hunter. They're not an archery hunter. They're not a muzzleloader hunter. They're not a rifle hunter. Most of the big buck hunters I know that are not wealthy are multi-weapon hunters. Why? They have to be. I don't hunt with a bow for the challenge. And I don't care about the challenge. It's already challenging enough to just hunt big mule deer. I hunt with a bow because mid-August to mid-September is about the only time you can, and I use this term loosely, pattern a mule deer. They're on their summer range typically. They're using the most open portions of their range. They still go in the brush. I watch them. But usually they're more visible that time of year. So you've got to hunt that time. And typically that's archery season. Now there are some early season hunts. Idaho's had a few. And as you know, Steve, they're pretty good if you can draw them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Colorado's, their high country rifle hunts are some of the hardest licenses to get. But if the unit's any good at all, it's going to be limited quota for rifle, or it's going to be archery, over the counter or draw. So you have to hunt archery season. Your next best time to hunt them is, I said the middle of September because that's typically when most archery seasons are pretty good. But you can kill them with bows anytime, but it's still pretty good up in late September. It just gets tougher to find them. I think after about the 10th of September, every day that goes by, they're a little bit harder to find.
Mm-hmm.
The next opportunity. What's that?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that's always our benchmark. Is that September 10th? They're gone. I mean, they drop that 500,000 feet and they're in the trees, and they get a lot harder to find.
There you go. They're harder to find, and even with no hunting pressure. I mean, I'm an outfitter. I manage 6,500 acres of private ground. We only take 5 deer hunters a year. There's hardly anybody up there, and during archery season, there's nobody. Yet these bucks just get harder to find every day after a bad month. Okay, then the next opportunity to hunt them is the October rifle seasons. And every state's different. I mean, Montana opens, I think they opened the 25th this year. They're late October. That's almost a rut mule deer hunt. Idaho's the 10th of October. Colorado's the middle of October on their second deer season. Wyoming is mid-September, which makes it such a unique opportunity. It's kind of like bow season, and you can hunt with a rifle. But that's your next time to hunt them. What's that good? It's not really the best time to hunt them, but now you get to hunt with a weapon that can shoot 500 yards. Some guys, much farther. However, it seems like the early part of the season is the only time you really catch them out in the open. The 10th, around here, the 10th, 11th, 12th, after that it gets tough hunting. You better hope you have a snowstorm or you just got lucky and you're the only guy that's hiking that basin this week. Then when we get to the middle of October, that is the toughest time, I think, to hunt mule deer in most units because of what I said earlier. Their coats are on. The weather's typically warm in the Intermountain West, especially. Colorado Plateau, all that country is typically not experiencing winter weather then. And it's nice enough weather that there's a ton of guys out, too. That's the best thing about hunting in snow. There's not very many people out. Mid-October gets really tough. That's when I go guide my elk hunters. And then right now, I think is the third time. From Halloween on, that is when the big bucks are coming around the does. And it's kind of on a sliding scale of good to bad. The first part of the month is not very good. You got to really pay attention to the does, and you'll only typically see the big bucks around them or their tracks early in the mornings. I think they'll go in, they'll check the does. There's not a lot of does in heat yet. They'll breathe on if they're in heat. But since there's not a lot of activity, they move out. But as you get closer to the 10th of November, and I'm talking about a line probably from Flagstaff, Arizona north, it gets kind of flaky below that. The dates are different, and it's kind of like whitetails in the south. The ruts just really spread out. But get north of that, up into here, you get past the 10th of November, they are hardcore in the rut. I was hunting Montana a couple of years ago, and we ran into a guy. It was like the 25th of November, and we're hunting in an area that's just tons of cover. And he'd made his mind. He was headed home. The mule deer did not rut that year, was his conclusion. Impossible. They rut every year. The difference is the more hunting pressure, the harder they are to find, because even when bucks are in the rut, they still hide. And so the seasons that have the least amount of hunting pressure from the 10th of November on, that's typically going to be the best. And in Idaho, typically draw seasons. We have a few backcountry hunts, and I've hunted them that are open later than that and that late. And that's a primo time to hunt bucks. Right? I think I add some to that. A lot of guys equate rut hunting with easy hunting. It's not easy hunting, and that's what defeats so many people on it. They're still big bucks, and they're still hard to kill. They're just a little bit easier to kill, a little bit more visible, but you still got to get out there and bust it, and you got to hunt all day, and you got to get out there early. You can't be getting out there at 8 o'clock in the morning. You got to do it right even during the rut. So those are the three prime times, I think. Late August, early September, early October when rifle season's first open, and then into November, and especially the rifle muzzleloader hunts. The mule deer hunts in November. If you're hunting snow country, you better hunt the first snow, because after that it gets really tough with archery gear because of the crunchy snow and the frozen ground. And I have 100 days in my belt of late archery hunting, and that's what I base it on. I never killed a big buck on the late archery hunts, and that's why I gave them up. It can be done. There's some guys that do it, but I don't think it's a real good use of an archer's time, because it's such a tough time to hunt them. Now, you can get into some of the southern western states that have some of those late archery seasons, and they can be pretty good. But you get up here where the snow is frozen from the 10th of November on, it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. Man, Robbie, time has absolutely flown by, and there's so many questions that I want to ask. We're for sure going to have you back on if you're up for it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we do go, though, Steve, what are a couple of specific questions you might have for this one?
I got more questions than we got time for.
I know, that's how I feel.
Definitely a wealth of information there, Robbie. I just, as you're talking, I don't have any specific questions, but so many things we're just hitting home of the, just right there. We've got our late 39 archery hunt that's open the 10th through the 30th of November, and it's big bucks get killed, but I freaking hate that hunt. It's really, really hard to do. And your crunchy snow comment was spot on. The second it snows, it freezes and it's there. And unless you're in a trail and one walks by you, you're pretty much SOL.
Yeah. Well, let's do this, guys. Let's.
Yeah, and that's the other problem with that time of year, Steve, is how long can you actually sit on a trail when it's 15 degrees? But it's a smart way to hunt. It definitely, and a lot of the guys that kill them right, that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. Let's do this. For all you listeners, you probably feel the same way that Steve and I do with a million questions. Go ahead and send us your questions to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Anything that's, Robbie said tonight that's, made you want to know more, wonder more, go ahead and send us those questions, and we'll for sure get back on the phone with Robbie and have a follow-up. I know, Robbie, you're getting ready to take off here for a few weeks of guiding, so I guess we'll leave that as the last point. Is what, you kind of mentioned some of the kind of strategies and tactics around November hunting, but leave us with one more thing of what's one more tip for guys who are heading out in those next few weeks as you are to guide that they can do for their hunts.
Kind of what I'm talking about is don't assume because it's the rut it's going to be easy. I actually think it's easier to hunt bucks in late August than it is during the rut. The problem with the rut is you've got one big buck surrounded by 20 does who are, hyper alert. I don't know about you guys, but does just piss me off. I have lost more big bucks because of does than I have because of big bucks. And so you've got to remember when you are in the forest that you send out with. If anybody follows Tom Brown Jr., God bless you. He's a tracker from the northeast. If not, you need to go get his books. But he talks about that we throw a concentric circle when we walk through the woods. Imagine if I throw a rock in a pond. A little circle goes out from that rock, and it goes all the way through the pond. The further it gets, the smaller it is, but it's still there. What a lot of hunters don't realize is that's what a human does in the forest. We walk through the forest, we make a noise, it goes out, it spooks an owl flies, it spooks a coyote runs, spooks a deer. We don't even perceive that stuff is going on, but it is, I promise you. And even during the rut, you gotta be careful. You are much more present than you think you are in the forest. A lot of guys will make the mistake of setting up on one side of the canyon with a pair of 15 power binoculars. That's what I do. I love them. I can look across the canyon with a set of Vortex Kaibabs, glass the whole canyon, but I forget that there's a 300-yard circle around that is affected by me zipping my pack and talking to my buddy, maybe sneaking a phone call into my wife. We forget all that stuff, especially during the rut, because we think it's the rut. They're going to be out here chasing does. Smartest bucks are still very careful during the rut. And so you got to hunt them just like you would with a bow. You're sneaking around, you're being quiet, you're keeping your wind in the favor. I get a whole chapter in my book about obeying the wind because I think that we just don't pay enough attention to it. Even myself, sometimes I catch myself still screwing that up. And so when you're rut hunting, you got to be as careful as you are when you're hunting with a bow. And then you got to get it through your head that even though I didn't see a big buck standing out on that great big open side hill that had 35 does on it, that doesn't mean there's not a big buck there. He's just smart, and he's going to be in the cover, and you're still probably only going to catch him at first light and last light. Or sometimes they just make a mistake in the middle of the day, especially if it's snowing and blowing, and you might catch them. But get it out of your mind that rut hunting is easy. It's just a little more advantage to the hunter, but you still got to get out and bust it. When I was young, I went on a few rut hunts, and I just thought the dates were going to do the trick for me, and I was sloppy in how I hunted, and I didn't kill big bucks when I should have.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta hunt smart during the rut.
Yeah.
And you've also got to remember they're moving a lot then, which sounds like it would make it easier, but it kind of depends. They can literally move out of the area that you're hunting too. And that's why on a rut, you got to be pretty mobile. I'm guiding a rut hunt here in the next week, and we are going to have trucks, horses, and our feet because we got to cover a lot of ground. Now, once we find the deer, we may not move 500 yards in a day. We don't need to because of that concentric circle. We don't want to. We're just going to make noise. But sometimes during the rut, the deer can actually migrate away from where you're at, and that is frustrating. And I'll leave it at this. That's why I talk about tracking so much in my book. The tracks don't lie. And the best big buck hunters I know pay attention to tracks. And that's really, really important during the rut when the deer are moving so that you're actually where there are deer.
Yeah, that's awesome, Robbie.
That's some great advice.
So what's the
One
best...
other tip. One quick thing I just thought of.
Yeah.
Hunt the secure does. Don't hunt the stinking does that are in the same meadow every day and two guys are looking at them, or they're by a road, or they're up by the radio tower where the joggers are. Don't mess with those does. Those big bucks are smarter than that. Even during the rut, they seek out the secure does. They would rather go spend their time with 3 or 4 does that are living down in a rough coulee, a mile or 2 or 3 from the road, than be out there with the 50 or 60 does that are grazing on the side of the golf course.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So before we go, what's the best way for our listeners to stay up to date with you, and additionally, where can they check out your book? Okay,
if you want to follow me, I post at least 2 live hunts a year on my blog, and you just go to rockslide.com. We spell rockslide ROKSLIDE. You can ask David Long why. I don't know why he chose it, but that's how it's spelled. Rockslide.com. Look for the blog. I actually host the blog. And you can go on the blog, you can subscribe, and then you will get notifications when I post. And I actually do live hunts from the field where I post from the field and I talk about these techniques in real time. If I'm doing a backcountry hunt and I can't post from the field, then I'll record everything, video, and then I'll post it when I get home. A lot of times I do it day by day as it happened. And so I know I'm going to have some of that come up in November here, so watch for that. My book is on Amazon.com. Just type in Hunting Big Mule Deer with Boone and Crockett mule deer or anything like that, and it should come up. It's called Hunting Big Mule, How to Pick the Best Buck of Your Life. And I also encourage you to come on Rock Slide if you're learning about the backcountry, and not just mule deer. We hunt everything on Rock Slide: big bucks, little bucks, does, fawns, bull elk, cow elk. I mean, there's a guy on Rock Slide right now doing a live hunt from Australia, and you'll connect with a lot of backcountry hunters. That's how I know Steve Beck, sponsor on Rock Slide. You can learn about the gear that we use, everything from optics to clothes. I'm also the editor of Rock Slide, so I'm in charge of publishing all our articles. I have published an article a week the last probably 8 weeks on gear reviews, from rifles to clothes to everything. And so it's just a good place to get linked up for any backcountry hunter, even if you're not hunting the West. I have guys that are hunting. Did you know there's backcountry in Tennessee? I did not know this, but I have guys writing to me. They're saying, hey, I learned this on Rock Slide. So anyways, I'd love to hook up with you. And you guys, I'd love to come back. As you can see, I just open the faucet and it just runs. I'm sorry, but
no, it's awesome.
I'm excited about big bucks. I think they're one of the greatest animals to hunt, and I just love to talk about them. We didn't even get into the real meat and potatoes of my book, which is the techniques that I use to hunt mule deer, and they're the tried and true technique we've all heard about over the years: still hunting, tracking, glassing, ambush hunting, which is one of my favorite, by the way. I talk about all that stuff, but I kind of end my book with this: is that you got to get beyond glassing to really kill big mule deer. It all starts with glassing. Glassing is very, very important. However, if you only stop there, you're not going to be as successful as you can. And I'd love to come back and talk to you guys about that and what I mean by that. And I just love talking about big deer.
Yeah.
Yeah. We definitely get you back on as soon as we can, Robbie. So here, yeah. Your definition of backcountry it's probably the best one I've heard, because we're always trying to define that, and just I love that. Just anything that's hard to get to, whether it's a mile or 10 miles, it's perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome.
That's
well,
right,
Robbie,
Steven. I've thought about that for years. I've thought about that for years too. What is backcountry? That's kind of what I came up with, because I know a place I can hike into takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to. It's only a mile off the road, and I see big bucks there. Why is that not backcountry? It is.
Yeah, it is. That's perfect.
Cool, man. Well, thanks, you guys.
all right, guys, thanks so much for listening. For where we go, Chris Kindle. You just won some Exo swag, so be sure and email us your shipping information to podcast@exomountaingear.com. If you want to enter a weekly contest to win Exo swag, it's real simple. Send us your feedback or questions to podcast@exomountaingear.com, or leave us a review on iTunes. Also, don't forget the show notes for this episode are at exomountaingear.com/13, as in 13. All right, have a good week. We'll catch you next time.